For over 25 years, One Piece fans have been asking the same question: what does the letter D actually mean? And almost every theory has gotten it wrong, not because the clues weren't there. They were. Oda put them in front of us in one of the very first arcs of the entire series, in a scene most people remember as emotional, not informative. A scene with no dialogue, no narration, no explanation at all, but that silence was the answer. Here's the part that should scare you. The world government has spent 800 years hunting down people with this letter, executing them, hiding them from history, fearing them like a curse passed through blood. And yet the truth behind the D has nothing to do with blood at all. It's not a race. It's not a bloodline. It's not even a prophecy. It's a promise. A promise made by a small group of people who needed a way to recognize each other without ever saying a word out loud. And the wildest part, that same promise was broken, split in two. One half became Luffy's smile in the face of death. The other half became Blackbeard's hunger for a crown, to Will's one letter. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why you just said a name in chapter 1183 that nobody had ever heard before, a name I believe belongs to Joy Boy himself. So stay with me, because we're about to take apart 800 years of history, one clue at a time. Let's start with what we actually know for certain, because before we break any assumptions, we need solid ground to stand on. Fact 1. The D is not tied to a single race or species. Most carriers we know are human: Luffy, Roger, Ace, Law, but we've also seen giants carry it, like Oars and the Don Quixote bloodline through Doflamingo's father's lineage. That alone tells us this letter isn't biological in the way fans originally assumed. It crosses species lines completely. Fact 2. There's no shared ideology among D carriers. This is the part that trips people up the most. Luffy fights for freedom. Roger died laughing, completely at peace with himself. But Marshall D, Teach, and Rocks D, Xebec are some of the most destructive, power-hungry villains in the entire story. If the D represented one unified belief system, that contradictions shouldn't exist. So whatever the D actually is, it isn't a moral compass. It's something else, something more primitive. Fact 3, and this is the big one: Corazon, a former world noble who lived among people who knew the deepest secrets of the world government, told Law directly that carriers of the D are the natural enemies of the gods. In the original Japanese text, the word used is even stronger. It implies a natural predator relationship, not a moral one, like a hunter and its prey, built into the biology of the world itself. 3 facts: no race, no ideology, but somehow a deep ancient fear from the people at the very top of the world. So what connects all of it? But that's where things start getting strange. Here's where most fans stopped looking. They assumed the answer to the D had to be hidden in some future flashback, some void century reveal still waiting in Egghead or Elbaf, but Oda already showed us the answer. He showed it in Alabasta, 12 years before chapter 1183 even existed. Remember the chaos with Mr. Taban Clay? He could transform into anyone, which meant the Straw Hats could no longer trust their own eyes. Someone wearing Nami's face could secretly be an enemy. So they came up with a simple solution. They each drew an X on their left arm, a private signal, proof of identity that an impersonator couldn't fake. That alone is clever writing. But Oda didn't stop there. When Vivi chose to stay behind in Alabasta, and the Straw Hats had to leave without saying goodbye because shouting her name in public would have put her in danger with the world government, they didn't speak a single word. They just raised their arms, showed her the X from a distance. No sound, no explanation needed, just a secret symbol that said, "You are still one of us." No matter how far apart we are, this mark proves it forever. That scene is the entire key to understanding the D. I believe 800 years ago, a crew of pirates did the exact same thing. They needed a way to prove loyalty without saying it out loud, because saying it out loud could get you killed. And the symbol they landed on was the letter D. It passed down, generation after generation. So quiet, so disguised as an ordinary middle initial, that the world government took centuries to even notice what was hiding in plain sight. And there's a moment in the story that proves this directly, not implies it. Proves it. Cobra discovers an old letter signed by Nefertari Lily, a former queen of Alabasta and one of the original 20 kings who founded the world government 800 years ago. When Cobra reads her full name out loud, the version with the D in it, Imu reacts with visible fury. Why would Imu care about a name on an old letter unless that name meant something specific? I believe that D was Lily's secret message to Joy Boy, a way of saying I'm on your side without ever writing a sentence that could get her executed for treason. It worked perfectly as a disguise. Anyone in the world government glancing at that letter would see a name, nothing more. But to someone who knew what the D meant, it was a declaration of loyalty hidden in plain sight, and it worked well enough that Imu only discovered Lily's betrayal centuries later, reading it for the first time alongside Cobra.so in its most basic, almost beautiful form. The D is friendship, a mark of loyalty created in a moment of crisis, by people who needed to recognize allies without ever being caught. But here's the detail that takes this from interesting theory to this was planned decades in advance. Go back and look at how the world government actually treats the letter. They don't ban it outright. They don't put up wanted posters that say anyone with a D will be executed on sight. That would be too obvious, too easy to trace, too easy for the public to start asking why. Instead, the fear is quiet, institutional, passed down through whispers among nobles. The kind of fear you only see in people like Sengoku, who personally chose to hide Roger's middle name from official Marine records not because Roger asked him to, but because Sengoku understood, on some level, that the letter itself was the dangerous part. More dangerous than the man. That's not how you treat a bloodline you can identify and eliminate. That's how you treat a code you don't fully understand yet, but you know connects to something buried in the true history you're desperately trying to keep buried, and Oda gives us small, scattered confirmations of this through the SBS columns over the years, those reader question and answer pages where Oda has, more than once, danced around questions about the D with answers that reveal just enough to keep the mystery alive without giving anything away. He treats every question about the D the exact same way the world government treats the letter itself, carefully, deliberately, and just vague enough to keep you guessing. Even the cover stories play into this. Look at the way different bloodlines carrying the D are scattered across completely unrelated corners of the world. East Blue, North Blue, the Goa Kingdom, the Sword Islands tied to Law's backstory in the North Blue. There's no shared homeland, no shared culture, no shared physical trait. The only thing connecting them is the letter itself, sitting quietly in the middle of their names like a password nobody bothered to translate, and this is where Oda may have left his biggest clue. If the D really is a mark passed down from a single crew 800 years ago, then every modern carrier should trace back to one of its original members. The Monkeys, the Portgas, the Trafalgars, the Nefertaris. Different surnames, different islands, different blood, but all branches of the same root. That root, I believe, is the crew of Joy Boy. This is where the theory needs to survive its biggest contradiction. Because if the D really represents one unified will, why are its two most famous modern carriers, Luffy and Blackbeard, moving in completely opposite directions? Luffy wants freedom for everyone around him. He laughs in the face of death because he's already made peace with who he is. Blackbeard wants the throne. He wants absolute power. He is visibly, openly terrified of death, clinging to immortality through the Yami Yami no Mi and the will of darkness itself. Two carriers. Same letter. Opposite philosophies. I don't think this is a plot inconsistency. I think it's the entire point, because I believe there were two wills from the very beginning, born from the same crew. The moment that crew split apart, we got our first real hint of this during the Roxy Xebec flashback, where we were introduced to a man named David Jones, another D carrier whose name doesn't fit the typical pattern we've seen in any other bloodline. And we later learned David Jones was once a king of the world himself. A man who didn't want to free anyone, he wanted the crown. That's not the will of D as we understand it through Luffy and Roger. That's something darker. I call it the will of Dave, the desire to rule, the hunger for the throne, not liberation for others but domination over everything. Blackbeard is its clearest modern heir, and he says it himself out loud. With no metaphor needed, he wants to be king of the world. It's worth pausing here, because this single distinction quietly rewrites how we should read almost every D carrier we've ever met. Roxy Xebec wasn't trying to free the world from the celestial dragons, he was trying to replace them. Marshall D. Teach isn't fighting the system because he believes it's unjust, he's fighting it because he wants to sit at the top of it himself. Even some of the more morally gray carriers fans argue about start to make more sense once you stop assuming D automatically means hero. It never did. It only ever meant this person remembers something the rest of the world forgot, and what they choose to do with that memory depends entirely on which half of the original crew they descend from. So now we have a split, the will of Dave on one side. But what's on the other side? What is Luffy actually carrying? Here's the detail nobody talks about, and it's hiding inside a single line of dialogue. In chapter 1183, in the middle of the chaos on Egghead, Aimu looks directly at Law and says that Law and Luffy will share the same fate as someone named Douzan. That name had never appeared before, not once, in over 1,000 chapters, and the way Aimu says it matters just as much as what is said. Up until that exact moment, Aimu had only ever referred to Luffy as Nika and to Law as Nidai, using their fruit titles, their mythological labels, never their actual names. But in that single line, Aimu drops the titles and uses real names, and in the same breath brings up Douzan. Just a few panels earlier, Aimu had been talking about Joy Boy. I believe Douzan is Joy Boy's real name. Think about the timing. Aimu defeated Joy Boy and erased him from recorded history. Saying that Luffy and Law will share Douzan's fate fits perfectly if Douzan is Joy Boy, because Aimu would be saying, essentially, you'll end up exactly like he did. And we already know Aimu and Joy Boy were once close. Aimu's own memories confirm they knew each other personally, centuries ago. Which means Aimu would absolutely know Joy Boy's real name. And here's where the picture suddenly gets bigger, to paths. One starting point, Joy Boy and his crew created the D as a symbol of loyalty and friendship, exactly like the X on the Straw Hat's arms. But at some point, that crew fractured. Someone inside the group wanted something different. Not freedom for everyone, power for himself. That fracture created two separate wills carried by the exact same letter. All the way to the present day, the will of Douzan, the will I believe belonged to Joy Boy's original crew. The will to liberate. The will to smile in the face of death because you fought for something you actually believed in. This is the will Luffy carries. The will Roger carried. The will Ace carried right up to his final breath, and on the opposite end, the will of Dave Blackbeard's will, Xebec's will. The will to conquer, to take the crown, to never bow to anyone, not out of love for others' freedom, but out of pure, unfiltered ambition. Same letter, same route, completely different destinations. There's another layer to this that most fans skip past too fast. Notice that Blackbeard doesn't just want power, he wants immortality through fear itself, swallowing the power of darkness so completely that even death can't touch him the way it touches everyone else. That's not just ambition. That's the exact opposite of what Roger felt standing on Laugh-Tale, laughing in the face of his own execution. Roger made peace with dying. Blackbeard is terrified of it. If the D really does split into two distinct emotional relationships, with mortality, one that accepts death as the price of freedom, and one that refuses to accept death at any cost, then Blackbeard isn't just a villain wearing the same letter as the hero. He's the walking proof that the original crew's fracture was never fully healed, and that fracture might explain something else that's bothered fans for years. Why does the world government seem to fear Roger and Luffy so much more than they fear Blackbeard? Blackbeard, by will of Dave logic, wants the throne the world government already sits on. He's not trying to burn the system down. He's trying to inherit it. Of course, they're less afraid of him. He wants what they already have. But Luffy, carrying the other half of that ancient split, doesn't want the throne at all. He wants to dismantle the entire idea that anyone needs to sit on one. That's the version of the D the world government has spent 8 centuries trying to erase. Because that's the version that ends them completely. But here's the part that changes everything. If Douzan really is Joy Boy, then we already know how this story ends for one of these two carriers, because Aimu just told us out loud in the present timeline. So what does this actually mean for the final saga? Roger reached Laugh-Tale and cried, not from fear, but from laughter so intense it broke him. He found the true history, understood the full truth of this world, and realized something critical. It was too early for him to be the one. He wasn't the right successor. I believe Roger understood that the world needed someone who carried both halves of what was lost, not just the power of Nika, the sun god fruit Luffy now wields, but also the will of Douzan, the original loyalty-driven will of Joy Boy's first crew. Luffy is the boy who drew an X on his arm to say, "You're my friend forever," without needing a single word. The boy who promised to save Nami's village before he even really knew her. The boy who stood by Vivi's side when an entire kingdom turned against her. That is exactly the profile of someone carrying the will of Douzan, not the will of Dave. And it's not a coincidence that Alabasta, the arc where the X symbol was born, is the same arc Oda has openly called more important than fans realize. Because Oda was telling us everything from the very beginning. The mark of friendship on that arm is a quiet echo of the letter that survived 800 years. There's also a visual detail worth sitting with. The letter D resembles a smile. Pair it with the X from Alabasta, and you get something that looks remarkably close to a grinning face. Happiness paired with loyalty, paired with survival. Think about what this means for every major confrontation still ahead of us. If Elbaf is where the giants finally reveal what they remember about the Void Century, and giants, remember, are one of the only other species besides humans confirmed to carry the D, then we may be one arc away from hearing the will of Douzan described from a completely different cultural perspective, one untouched by 800 years of world government propaganda. And think about Imu specifically. If Imu and Joy Boy or Douzan really were close centuries ago, then everything Imu does now, every decision to erase his name from history, stops looking like simple villainy and starts looking like something far more personal. Betrayal, grief twisted into hatred, the kind of erasure you only attempt against someone who once meant something to you. That reframes the entire endgame, because the final battle for the One Piece might not just be Luffy versus the world government. It might be the last living echo of Douzan's will standing face to face with the one person who buried him in the first place. For Elbaf, for Imu's endgame, and for the final clash with the world government. This changes the stakes completely. If Blackbeard truly represents the will of Dave reaching its final form, then his collision course with Luffy isn't just hero versus villain. It's the final battle between two halves of the same broken promise, 800 years in the making. And if Douzan really is Joy Boy's true name, the world government isn't just hiding a person. They're hiding the origin of the very letter they've feared for centuries. So let's put every piece on the table. 800 years ago, a crew of pirates led by Joy Boy needed a way to recognize each other in total secrecy. They created a symbol, the letter D, exactly the way the Straw Hats created the X in Alabasta. Not a bloodline, not a prophecy, a promise. That crew fractured. One side stayed loyal to Joy Boy's original ideal: freedom, loyalty, the willingness to laugh in the face of death because you fought for something real. The other side, led by a man who would become a king of the world, twisted that same letter into a hunger for the throne itself. Both wills survived for 800 years, hidden inside the same initial, splitting bloodlines without anyone realizing. Two separate legacies were running side by side, and in chapter 1183, Imu accidentally confirmed it, dropping Joy Boy's real name, Douzan, in the same breath as warning Luffy and Law about their shared fate. How did we miss this for over 25 years? It was hiding inside a silent goodbye on a beach in Alabasta the entire time. Two arms raised, one symbol shared, and not a single word needed to say everything that mattered. If this theory turns out to be true, it could completely reshape how we understand every D carrier in this story, heroes and villains alike. But what do you think? Did Oda really plan this split from the very first arc, all the way back in Alabasta? Let me know in the comments, and if you want the next theory the moment it drops, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because Imu's secrets are only getting deeper from here.